Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
From AI-inspired insights from farmers.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here, we'd love to hear from you too.
Absolutely.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and definitely leave a comment telling us what you want to see more of on this deep dive.
We're always looking for new ideas, and we really value your feedback.
So what farm-related mysteries are you dying to uncover?
Right.
What questions are keeping you up at night? Let us know, and maybe we'll tackle them in a future deep dive. Today, so, if you're thinking about farming, or maybe you're just starting out, one thing you might be thinking about is, what about all those pollinators out there?
Yeah, the bees, butterflies, all those guys.
All those little creatures.
Critically important.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to be diving into today. All the challenges that they're facing.
And some potential solutions.
And some potential limitations of technology.
Yeah, so if you are, just beginning your farming journey, this is going to be really key for you.
Because it really does directly impact, the success of your crops.
Absolutely.
And just how sustainable agriculture is in the long term.
And I think that, one of the things that a lot of people listening are probably thinking about is just what does the future of pollination look like?
Right.
What about these natural systems that support it? Are we going to have to go a different way?
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah, so we'll be looking at the insect crisis.
Yeah.
Which is very real. We're going to examine the science behind robotic pollinators.
Ooh.
Which, it's not just a theory anymore. It's actually happening.
Wow.
We're going to, try to understand why corporations are investing in this.
Yeah, what's their motivation?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, kind of the big question is, what does all of this mean for biodiversity on our planet?
With the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And our goal here is to just give you all of the information.
Right.
So that you can, really understand this complex issue.
Make an informed decision.
Exactly. And we're drawing on, research from experts.
Absolutely.
Analysis, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So let's start talking about the insect crisis.
Okay.
I think it's really easy to kind of overlook all these little bees and butterflies.
Yeah, they're tiny.
They're just flitting around.
But they're so important.
But they're so important. They're so fundamental.
To our food systems.
Yeah. And it's not just the honeybees, right?
No, it's a lot of different pollinating insects.
And 1/3 global food production.
Depends on them.
Yeah, and for you as a future farmer, this is like a big deal.
Huge, yeah.
Because it's not just a statistic. It's like...
It's a service.
Yeah, a crucial natural service that you're going to need to rely on.
Absolutely. And, I think that brings up the fact that pollinator populations are declining.
Right.
The data is pretty concerning.
Yeah, and we have some data to share.
Yeah, so between April 2022 and April 2023, the United States saw its second highest honeybee hive mortality rate.
Wow.
In 12 years.
Wow.
So 48% of colonies were lost.
That's almost half.
It is almost half, and that's according to Be Informed.
Wow.
And, it's important to remember honeybees are really important, but they're just one pollinator.
Right.
So this high loss rate is kind of a sign that there's some bigger environmental stresses out there.
Right. It's impacting a lot of insects.
A lot of insect species.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think is causing this decline? I mean, it seems like more than one thing.
Yeah, there's a few different things that research has pointed to.
Okay.
So habitat loss.
Okay.
That makes sense. They need places to live and eat.
Right.
Increased use of pesticides.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Especially in agriculture, and then climate change.
Okay, so those are kind of the big three.
Yeah, they're all connected.
Yeah, and they're all impacting all those pollinators.
Yeah, habitat loss means there are fewer places for them to find food.
Right, and fewer safe places to nest.
Exactly. Pesticides, even the ones that aren't supposed to kill pollinators, can still harm them.
Right.
And climate change, well, that can really mess with the timing of when flowers bloom and when pollinators are active.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it throws everything off.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, one of our sources was also talking about just how complex bee pollination is.
Yeah, it's not just about having bees in a field.
Right. You can't just plop down some bees and assume everything's going to be fine.
Exactly. There are so many factors, like where your farm is.
Right.
What you're growing. Where you put the beehives, even the health of those bee colonies.
Yeah, are the bees thriving or are they struggling?
Exactly, and all of that impacts how effective the pollination is.
Wow, so that's a lot more complicated than people think.
It really is, and I think that complexity is why people are looking into technology.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so technology is this potential alternative.
Yeah, a more controlled alternative.
Okay, so it's we're trying to take control of this natural process.
In a way, yeah. And Ali El-Suhail, who's an investment banking associate, he actually thinks that technology could be a way to deal with these challenges.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So that brings us to robot bees,
Robot bees.
which honestly sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, but it's real.
It's actually
It's
happening.
being developed right now.
So how do they even work?
So basically, they're trying to do what bees do naturally.
Okay.
So the robot collects pollen from the stamen,
Okay. The male part of the flower,
right? And then it takes that pollen and puts it on the stigma.
which is the female part.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they have to do this with the same kind of plant.
So like a very precise process.
Very precise.
And it's kind of like what Ali Al-Suhail was saying, artificial insemination.
It's like that, but for plants.
Okay, so they're basically doing the same job as a bee, but they're not bees, they're robots.
Exactly.
So what's the advantage?
Well, the idea is that robots would be more precise,
Okay.
more efficient.
So like they could do it better than bees?
Potentially, yeah, they could deliver the pollen to exactly the right spot.
Okay.
And they wouldn't be affected by things like bad weather.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, or, if the bees are just not active at a certain time.
So it's like we could control when the pollination happens.
Exactly. We could control the whole process.
Interesting.
And there's also research into non-contact methods.
What does that mean?
So things like air blast pollination, where you're using air currents to spread the pollen.
Oh, wow. So it's not always about these little robots going from flower to flower.
No, there are other options.
Interesting.
But yeah, those robots are definitely a big part of the research right now.
Okay, so, we've been talking about robots, but we also read about artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things.
Yeah, AI and IoT.
Yeah, and how that can actually help natural bee populations.
Right. So there are these things called smart beehive systems.
Okay.
And there are organizations like the World Bee Project that are using them.
Okay.
So basically, they put these systems in beehives that are in agricultural areas.
Okay.
And the systems collect data on how the bees are behaving.
Oh, wow.
And they do this across all these different ecosystems.
So we can see how the bees are doing in different environments.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah. And Sabiha Rahmani Malik, she's the executive president and founder of the World Bee Project.
Okay.
And she says that this technology can help us learn a lot about how to improve honeybee pollination.
Okay.
And also how to keep the colonies healthy.
So it's kind of like we're using technology to learn more about the bees and help them.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
But she also had a really good point about, we can't just focus on honeybees.
You're right. Honeybees are important, but they're not the only pollinators out there.
Right. There are thousands of other species.
Yeah, about 20,000 species of wild bees.
Wow.
And other insects that pollinate.
Like bumblebees and hoverflies.
Exactly.
Yeah, and those are declining too.
Yes. So just focusing on honeybees isn't going to solve the whole problem.
Right. We need to think about all the pollinators.
You do.
Okay, so these smart beehives that you were talking about.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more about how they work?
Sure. So they use AI and IoT.
Okay. Artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things.
Right. So basically, they can monitor the bee colonies 24/7.
Wow.
They collect all sorts of data.
Like what kind of data?
Oh, temperature, humidity, the sounds the bees are making,
Oh, wow.
even how much pollen they're bringing in.
So it's like a really comprehensive look at what's happening inside the hive.
Exactly. And all of this data can then be used to help the bees.
Oh, okay. How?
So if there's a problem, you can intervene remotely.
Oh, that's cool.
You can adjust the temperature, provide treatments for diseases, even feed them if they need it.
Wow. So it's like we're giving the bees a high-tech home.
Yeah, basically. And it's all to help them thrive.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and there are some companies that are doing some really interesting work in this area.
Like who?
So there's a company called BeeWise, and they make these automated hives that use IoT and AI.
Okay.
And then there's another company, Aruga Farming, and they're using robotics for pollination.
Oh, so they're actually working on those robot bees.
Yes, but they're also using robotics to help with other aspects of farming.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a really exciting field with a lot of potential.
Yeah. But, I'm curious what Sabiha Rahmani Malik thinks about all this.
Yeah, she's actually a bit more cautious about whether technology can actually replace natural pollination. Yeah, she thinks that the technology just isn't advanced enough yet to do what nature has been doing for millions of years.
Right, because nature has kind of perfected this process over time.
Exactly.
Yeah, and she's also concerned about some of the potential negative consequences.
Yeah, she thinks that there could be unintended ecological and economic impacts.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, she's worried about what she calls species invasion.
Okay.
So if we introduce a bunch of robot bees into the environment,
Right.
they could end up competing with natural pollinators,
Right.
disrupting the balance of the ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And she also thinks that relying too heavily on robots could actually put our food supply at risk.
Oh, how so?
Well, if something goes wrong with the technology,
Right.
or if there's a cyber attack or something.
We wouldn't have those natural pollinators to fall back on.
Exactly, we'd be putting all our eggs in one basket.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And then there are the economic costs.
Right, because building all these robots would be expensive.
Very expensive, and it would require a lot of resources, like mining for lithium and rare earth metals.
Which is not great for the environment.
Not at all.
And those materials could even end up in our food.
It's possible.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, and then there's the energy consumption.
Right, because all those robots would need to be powered somehow.
Exactly, and that's not exactly in line with our goals of reducing carbon emissions.
Yeah, not at all.
So yeah, she has some pretty serious concerns.
So basically she's saying that we should be focusing on protecting the pollinators we already have.
Exactly. She thinks that investing in habitat restoration,
Right.
reducing pesticide use, creating pollinator-friendly environments, that's the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It's like, why try to reinvent the wheel when we already have a system that works?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the big picture, but we also found some information about specific robotic pollinator projects.
Oh yes, there are a few prototypes in development.
Okay, can you tell us about them?
Yeah, so there's one in Japan where they've created this tiny drone,
Okay.
and it's got a little horsehair built that's coated in this special gel,
Okay.
and they've actually been able to pollinate a lily with it.
Oh, wow. So it works?
Yeah, in a lab setting.
Okay.
But the researcher who developed it, his name is Eijiro Miyako,
Okay.
he says it's still really hard to control the drone manually.
Okay.
So he thinks the next step is to use AI and GPS to make it autonomous.
So, like, it could fly itself and pollinate flowers without a human controlling it.
Exactly.
Wow, that's pretty futuristic.
It is, and they also want to add high-resolution cameras.
So the drone can see the flowers better.
Yes, and so the AI can figure out the best path for pollination.
Oh, wow. So they're really trying to mimic the way bees fly and pollinate.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing what they can do with technology these days.
Okay, so that's the Japanese drone?
Yeah.
What about other projects?
Well, there's this really cool project at Harvard University. They've developed this tiny robot called the RoboBee.
Okay.
And it's only about the size of a quarter.
Wow, that's tiny.
Yeah, and it can fly,
Okay.
but it can also swim.
What?
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
That's so cool.
And it can even perch upside down
How?
using static electricity.
Oh, wow. So it's like a really versatile little robot.
It is, and they made it using this unique manufacturing process that's inspired by pop-up books and origami.
What?
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
So they're basically folding these tiny robots.
Yeah, kinda, and their next goal is to create a hive
Okay.
where the robobees can recharge themselves.
So they wouldn't need to be plugged in.
Exactly. They could just fly around, pollinate, and then go back to the hive to recharge.
That's amazing.
And they're also thinking about deploying them in swarms.
Oh, wow. Like a whole bunch of tiny robot bees?
Yeah, and they want to use AI to control the swarms.
So they could work together to pollinate.
Exactly.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's like something out of a science fiction movie.
Okay, so we have the Japanese drone. We have the RoboBee. What was the third project?
So this one is a little different. It's at West Virginia University,
Okay.
and they're developing an autonomous wheeled robot.
Okay, so this one doesn't fly.
No, this one drives around.
Oh, interesting.
And it's designed for what they call precision pollination.
Okay, what does that mean?
So it's got LiDAR and cameras,
Okay.
so it can locate individual flowers,
Okay.
figure out if they're ready to be pollinated,
Okay.
and then it uses a robotic arm to apply the pollen directly.
Oh, wow. So it's very targeted.
Very targeted.
Okay.
And they're starting by testing it on raspberries and blackberries
Okay. In a greenhouse.
in a greenhouse. Yeah, so it's still early stages.
So it's like they're still working out the kinks.
Exactly. But the lead researcher, Yugu, he says they're really focused on proving that this technology can work.
Okay.
So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
So it sounds like, we have all these cool projects, but they're all still in development.
Yeah, they're all at least 10 years away from being commercially available.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the RoboBee still needs to be tethered to a power source.
Right.
The Japanese drone needs better guidance.
Okay.
And the WVU robot is still in the early planning stages.
So it's going to be a while before we see robot bees buzzing around our farms.
It'd be a while.
But it's not all doom and gloom.
Right.
We also read about how in some cases natural pollinators can be more effective than we might think.
Yes, there's some research from entomologists at Cornell University
Okay.
at the Danforth lab,
Okay.
and they found that native bee populations can actually meet the pollination needs of orchards in some areas.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and there are even orchards in New York State that have stopped using rented honeybee hives.
Oh, wow.
And they're relying entirely on native bees now.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it just shows that if we create the right environment,
Right.
native pollinators can thrive
And do the job.
and do the job.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about corporate investment.
Okay.
Because, we saw that Walmart even filed a patent for robot bees.
Yeah, back in 2018.
So clearly corporations are interested in this technology.
They are.
And, they probably see it as a way to protect their supply chains.
Yeah, I mean, with pollinator populations declining,
Right.
they're probably looking for ways to ensure that they can still get the crops they need.
Yeah, it makes sense from a business perspective.
It does, but the question is it really a good idea?
Right. And our sources actually suggest that it might not be.
Yeah, there's this article in Science Direct,
Okay.
and the authors argue that even though there's a lot of investment in robotic pollination,
Right.
it's just not viable yet.
Not technically or economically.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break that down.
Okay.
What are the technical limitations?
So basically, the authors say that robots just aren't as sophisticated as real bees.
Okay.
They point out that flowers are really complex. They have all these different shapes and colors and scents.
Right.
And even tiny patterns on their surfaces that we can't even see.
Wow.
And bees have evolved to recognize all of those cues.
Okay.
And they know how to interact with different flowers to collect pollen and nectar.
So it's like they're really specialized.
Very specialized. And it's really hard to replicate that in a robot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's a big engineering challenge.
And what about the economic side of things?
Well, the authors argue that it would just be too expensive
Okay.
to replace all the natural pollinators with robots.
Yeah, I mean, there are trillions of bees out there.
Exactly, and building and maintaining all those robots would be a huge undertaking.
Yeah, not to mention the environmental impact.
Right, they talk about that too.
Okay, so what are the environmental concerns?
So first of all, there's the energy use.
Right, because building and operating all those robots would require a lot of energy.
It would, and then there's the carbon emissions.
Right, from manufacturing and transporting the robots.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the issue of mining for materials.
Yeah, like lithium and rare earth metals.
Right, which can be really harmful to the environment.
And those materials could end up in our food chain.
Yeah, that's not good.
Not good at all.
And, beyond the direct environmental costs, they're also worried about the impact on ecosystems.
Yeah, they're basically saying that introducing a bunch of robot bees into the environment could be like introducing an invasive species.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we know that invasive species can cause a lot of damage.
Right, they can outcompete native species,
Exactly.
disrupt the balance of the ecosystem.
Yeah, and we just don't know what the long-term consequences of that would be.
Yeah, it's like we're messing with a system that we don't fully understand.
Exactly.
And, it's not just about the environment. There are social and cultural implications, too.
Right. The authors talk about how replacing natural pollinators with robots could devalue our relationship with nature.
Oh, okay, I see what they mean.
Like beekeeping, for example.
Right.
It's not just about honey.
Right, it's a tradition.
It's a cultural practice. It's connected to our history.
Yeah. And there's also the aesthetic value of pollinators.
Absolutely. They're beautiful.
They're part of the natural world that we enjoy.
And they inspire us.
Yeah. And if we replace them with robots, we lose all of that.
We do.
And, for our listeners who are thinking about farming, there's also the issue of food security.
Right. The authors argue that relying on robotic pollination could actually make our food system more vulnerable.
Oh, how so?
Well, something happens to the technology,
Right.
like a malfunction or a cyber attack.
We wouldn't have a backup.
Exactly. We'd be completely reliant on these robots.
And if they fail,
our food supply could be at risk.
wow, that's a pretty scary thought.
It is, and this is especially concerning for people who rely on small farms.
Right, because they might not have the resources to invest in this technology.
So they'd be even more vulnerable.
So it seems like while corporations might see robot bees as a solution,
Right, a way to control the situation.
it could actually create more problems.
It could, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the future of biodiversity.
Okay.
Because, we keep coming back to this idea that pollinators are essential.
They are. They're not just important for crops.
Right. They're a vital part of the entire ecosystem.
Absolutely. And the Science Direct article makes it very clear that protecting pollinators is essential for maintaining biodiversity.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to that interconnectedness.
Exactly.
Pollinators help plants reproduce.
Right.
And those plants provide food and shelter for other animals.
And so on.
Yeah, it's like a chain reaction.
It is. And if one part of the chain breaks down,
The whole system suffers.
exactly.
And for our listeners who are new to farming or thinking about starting a farm,
This is really important for them to understand.
yeah, because they're going to be managing a piece of land.
Right.
And they have a responsibility to protect the biodiversity on that land.
Absolutely. And there are things they can do.
Yeah, like what?
Well, they can plant native wildflowers. Right.
They can create habitats for pollinators.
Right.
They can reduce their use of pesticides.
Okay.
And all of those things will help to support biodiversity.
And it's not just about doing the right thing for the environment. It's also good for their farm.
Exactly. Healthy ecosystems are more productive.
Yeah, it's like you're creating a win-win situation.
Exactly.
Okay, so it seems like the message here is that we need to work with nature.
Yes, not against it.
Yeah. And that means supporting existing pollinators.
And creating environments where they can thrive.
Yeah, and there's actually a growing body of research that's shifting its focus in this direction.
Yeah, instead of just focusing on honeybee pests,
Right.
scientists are starting to look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
How is climate change impacting bees?
Right?
How are changes in land use affecting them?
Yeah, how is agriculture impacting them?
Exactly. It's a much broader approach.
And it's leading to some interesting new ideas.
Like what?
Well, one idea is to focus on what they call ecological intensification.
So basically, it's about finding ways to farm in a way that's both productive and sustainable.
Okay.
And that includes creating habitats for pollinators,
Right.
reducing pesticide use.
And diversifying crops.
Yeah. So instead of just growing one thing,
Right.
you grow a variety of things.
Which is better for the soil,
right, yeah.
better for the ecosystem.
And better for pollinators.
Exactly.
So it's like we're moving away from this idea of trying to control nature.
Right.
And we're moving towards an approach that's more about working with nature.
Absolutely.
Okay, so before we wrap up,
Yes.
let's give our listeners some concrete advice,
Okay.
some actionable steps they can take to support sustainable practices and protect biodiversity.
All right. So first of all, create diverse habitats on your farm.
Okay.
Plant native wildflowers.
Okay.
Let some areas go wild.
Right.
Provide nesting sites.
So like bee hotels.
Yeah, things like that.
Okay.
Second, adopt integrated pest management. Yes, minimize or eliminate the use of broad-spectrum pesticides.
Okay.
Explore biological controls.
Right.
Targeted treatments.
So we're not just like spraying everything with chemicals.
No, we want to be more precise, more thoughtful.
Okay.
If you need to use honeybees,
Right.
work with local beekeepers who practice sustainable hive management.
Okay.
Diversify your crops.
Right. So grow a variety of things.
Yes, that creates a more resilient ecosystem.
Okay.
And lastly, educate yourself and others.
Right. Stay informed about the latest research.
Yes, and share that knowledge with your community.
Yeah, that's so important.
And you can even participate in citizen science initiatives.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Help track pollinator populations.
Yeah, so get involved.
Get involved.
So those are some really great tips.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think they are.
Yeah.
So to kind of sum up everything we've talked about today,
Yeah.
We've learned about the insect crisis,
Right.
which is a very real and serious problem.
Absolutely.
We've talked about the technological advancements in robotic pollination.
Which are fascinating.
Yeah, they're really cool.
But also potentially problematic.
Yeah, and we've talked about the role of corporate investment.
And the importance of biodiversity.
And ultimately, the message seems to be that we need to focus on supporting natural pollinators.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For you as a new or aspiring farmer.
Sustainable practices are key.
Yeah. And, it's not just about the environment. It's about the success of your farm.
Yeah, healthy ecosystems mean healthy crops.
Exactly.
So as you embark on your farming journey,
Think about those pollinators.
yeah, those tiny but mighty creatures,
They're your partners.
how are you going to support them?
How are you going to create an environment where they can thrive?
How are you going to ensure a thriving future for your farm?
And for the environment.
Yeah, that's something to really think about.
Absolutely.
So thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Yes. Thank you.
We hope you learned a lot. Expert speaker.
Hitting that like button and smash that subscribe.